Okay, so we're going to be talking all about game streaming. Now, notice we're not talking about live streaming like we have done previously on the channel, but think about the scenario where you're playing on a game, but it's not playing on your PC under your desk, it's not playing on your console, it's playing somewhere else on some infrastructure elsewhere. That's the topic today on Cloud with Chris. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you for joining. We are in another episode of Cloud Gaming Notes. We had a month off, we had a break, but we are back and we are talking about game streaming. So, it's probably one of those topics you've heard a bit about. We're going to explore it as we normally do and think about some of the benefits that come with it and really how cloud enables this kind of scenario. Because if you think about it, if we didn't have all of this abundance of infrastructure, we wouldn't be able to do something like this. So we'll be exploring all of that here on this episode. But you know the deal, if you like this gaming related content, please hit the like button, please hit subscribe, please hit the notification bell, because we can make sure we can get more of this content out. And of course, if there's certain things that we talk about that really interest you along the way, let us know, because maybe that could be a session. So with that, you know him already. Let's introduce Lee Williams. Hey Lee.
Hey Chris, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Good. Like we say every time, I think the introductions are getting shorter and shorter for you now. It's just
Kind of, yeah.
it's just going to be Lee at some point. You know, no intro or anything else. Just Lee. Off we go.
Rename the podcast to just two Welshmen rumbling about the cloud and
I
see
mean,
how far that goes.
we could. You know, that could be its own podcast, couldn't it?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So, I guess we're gonna focus on game streaming, and again, really for anyone listening in, we're not talking live streaming. We're talking about the concept of a game which is being streamed to my device, and I'm playing it. The game is actually being hosted and run elsewhere. So, very broad topic, and I think one that could go in a number of avenues. We could talk about shopping experiences. We could talk about like the actual delivery model and the gaming experience. So what's a good place to start?
Yeah, you actually touched on something in kind of the intro, and that's really pertinent, which is um, the terminology used is kind of a little bit non-distinct. So game streaming has been used to describe me playing a game on my device and streaming it through, say, like a Twitch or Facebook gaming, so others can spectate at my gameplay, not participate. What we're talking about is the streaming of, or gameplay streaming, which is the streaming of the actual game itself to me, and it's genuinely just me enjoying that content or being produced, and that is where the game is actually being processed on a separate machine in the cloud, and the video stream of that gameplay is then sent back to me super quickly with low latency, and then my input is just sent back and forth. So, to your point, where do we start in this? Why even do that? We've had consoles, we've had mobile phones, we've had PCs that do processing locally on the device for some time. And I should point out, with some game streaming, that still happens. There's a little bit of a local acceleration. But in general, the benefit gives is that you don't have to invest so much in the hardware to be able to enjoy top of the range performance and graphics. All of that processing is done centrally on a cloud infrastructure or a hub where there's huge economies of scale. The provider has bought a ton, let's say, of equipment to be able to provide this experience. And so they're able to provide that at a much lower cost, typically a monthly subscription fee to a service for that. As a consumer, well, I'm not device attached anymore. I can play this on my PC, on my phone, on my console in some cases, maybe even my TV, any device really that receives an internet signal or internet connection to stream the gameplay back.
Yeah. And I think the analogy, right, that I think of there is comparing years gone by where we all would have bought DVDs or things like that and, built our own library of movies, right? Now I can say, hands on heart, I think we've got a subscription for Netflix, for Prime, for Disney Plus, Now TV, I think that's all of the subscriptions we have, and Spotify as well, right? But there's so many different avenues of content we've got access to there. Can you imagine trying to like store all of the DVDs for the content across all of those different services? Like, there's no way, at least in my apartment, there's no way we're going to have the storage space for that alone, right? But the cost of,
Yeah,
and it's a really good analogy, the cost of having to buy all those different consoles or gaming PCs or whatever it may be to actually get those
yeah.
games and then buy the games for those different platforms as well, versus having that subscription type service or that streaming service, is the same analogy, I think.
Yeah, and you touched on something here that's really important when you were just describing those movie or video content subscriptions you have.
Mm.
One of the biggest shifts we've seen is people just having a greater level of comfort with intangible content. What I mean by that is, we can all hark our memories back to when the Xbox One originally launched, and the concept of digital tokens and non-physical
Mm.
discs were a thing, and that didn't go particularly well. But I think as time has evolved, people have a greater level of comfort with consuming content that doesn't really exist. And that's not even owning the content. That's just streaming content that I will never own, but in return for a much more favorable monthly price of access to content. So I feel like that's been one consumer shift that's enabled these services to progress. And gaming is now starting to follow the same path that Netflix, Hulu, HBO has taken previously. But we could split this conversation, go two ways. I mean, one is the value of being able to have access to a portfolio of content. Think Xbox Game Pass, think Stadia, think of there's a number of other gaming subscriptions out there. Ton of benefits there. But then marry that with a service that allows you to stream that content, as we've seen with other types of entertainment and so forth. That's where it becomes a real game changer, I think.
Yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it, when you start really looking into it and the model of how we actually change as a consumer, because look at the watching patterns that you probably have of your favorite TV shows, right? When you think of DVDs and things like that, it's a case of, oh, I've got to go to the DVD player, I've got to change the disc, I've got to go do this, and oh no, we don't have that other DVD yet, we're waiting for it in the post or whatever, as opposed to having at your fingertips the ability to be able to just go, you know what, I'm just going to go watch whatever TV show I'm watching and change over to something else. And that luxury, it's that constant analogy that gets bounded around on Twitter and other places, where talking about this idea of fulfillment, that because we have access to everything, right, you don't have to wait for that next show, which is obviously a good thing and a bad thing. You've got more access to things, but it changes that way we work with the content, doesn't it? And you could say the same for games.
Massively. Totally. I mean, let's take it this way, right? Before we go into the depth of cloud and the impact that has through streaming, pivot to the mentality of a subscription to content. It as we touched on, it's something that we have become much more comfortable with holistically. I have a coffee subscription. Who knows? I mean, like, why have I done that? I don't know, but I subscribe to coffee.
I never knew that was a thing.
Amazon.
There we go.
Well, you can. I'm on Amazon Subscribe and Save. I have Hulu. I have HBO. I have Netflix. I have probably a dozen other things I don't know I'm subscribing to. But the important thing, I think, is kind of with Netflix as well, by removing the initial upfront cost. So, it's $60 a game, $70 for a game nowadays. It encourages more discoverability.
Yes.
I used to work on Game Pass. That was something we absolutely saw. People who played more games, people who had Game Pass actually played more games outside of Game Pass as well. And it just increased that sense of curiosity and discoverability, because you could jump into another game from it. Maybe that wasn't what I liked. Oh, hey, I found a new genre I didn't even know I liked. Would never paid for it because it was such a high barrier. The net benefit specifically to game creators of this is, well, actually to game consumers and game creators, is a much higher level quality of games, because as a game creator, I have less anxiety about building a game and not finding an audience and that cost being sunk, because putting a game into a service like Game Pass, you instantly have an incredibly large audience already there. And so it incentivizes me to invest more in the quality of the gameplay, because I'm de-risking myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that really stands out in terms of just changing the game, pardon the pun, for content creation. And you can see that in Netflix. I mean, gosh, Netflix knows it has a dedicated audience, and the quality of the content that they're producing, as an example, same goes for Hulu and HBO and various others, has gone up much more than we've seen in various other aspects. When a movie comes out, it's debatable whether it'll be good or not, but you could pretty much say a lot of the streaming content has performed well. And so I think that provides a huge benefit for the game creator, but also the game consumer.
Yeah, it really does. And just to really unpick that a bit more, just to be really clear for folks listening, like if you are a game creator and maybe you're a brand new creator, maybe you're an indie studio or something like that, and you're making your first game or second game, your third game, you're not very discoverable yet. You're not well known. The fact that you're in this marketplace almost, or this catalog of different games, typically that platform will have a recommendation service. So, hey, you've played this, or hey, you've watched this show. Do you want to watch this show, for example, and that kind of thing. And exactly that you said earlier, the consumer gets the benefit of, hey, I'm subscribed to this. I get more content, and based on what I've watched, you're telling me I'll like this as well. Cool. But actually, the benefit for those game creators is that you could be tapping into audiences who would never have even considered your game. Maybe it's because of the price, maybe it's because of the fact they just don't know your studio or the types of games you've made before or whatever it is. But actually suddenly you've got this potentially huge audience unlocked that you never had before, I guess.
Yeah, and also think about it as well. Previously, I would have paid, say, $70 for a game. Therefore, what would have been my propensity to have bought downloadable content, add-ons? And bear in mind, that game would have lost a lot of margin being sold through a store, maybe physical or maybe less so in digital. But it kind of questions a little bit about, would I be now much more likely to spend money on downloadable content, add-ons, things like that I wouldn't have done previously. So as a game creator, I now enjoy the luxury of, being able to monetize my audience on higher margin, downloadable content.
Yeah.
But I was just touching on the prospect of, if you don't have that high barrier to entry, in some cases, you have a high propensity to spend on post-sale monetization content because you haven't sunk all the cost in the base game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what I was adding on to that as we just dropped there was the fact that we spoke, I think, in either episode 1 or episode 2 about these different avenues that you might think of bringing in revenue for a game. It's not just about keeping the lights on. It's about how you then build that game environment up, the game studio, game creator, however you want to call it. But figuring out those revenue sources, not just to keep the lights on, but it's a business at the end of the day. You need to thrive. So because you haven't got that money potentially coming in for disc sales or cartridge sales or whatever it is, what is that new avenue that you go and look at then? Maybe it is DLC.
Yeah, totally. And, speaking as someone who was on the category side previously, I think one of the other interesting things is, and I think this is less of a concern nowadays, if I'm being honest, but when you have physical inventory, that's also a cost.
Yeah.
You are working with a retailer, if that doesn't sell through, to sell it through. There's storage costs. Yes, that is solved with a digital marketplace completely. But with kind of streaming content, you don't have to worry about, like, gosh, I've got how many kind of licenses in my game am I building? What stores am I populating myself in? You have an audience, and I think that's the bit that I think is most interesting, and actually segues nicely into that second part, which is more about that cloud streaming capability and how that changes consumption as well.
Yeah. So let's jump into it then. I guess on the one hand, I guess what we were skirting around a little bit there is almost this subscription model initially, but then thinking a bit about the storefront for digital delivery, I suppose. That's kind of one aspect of what we're talking about, which, again, using your pun, completely changes the game, because no longer do you have to, on release day of a game, have to go to the store, queue up at midnight or whatever it is to get your copy of that game. Now you just have your downloads turned on, you've bought the game ahead of time, pre-ordered it, and it's digitally downloaded to your device potentially, or you just start streaming it 1 minute past midnight, and it's now there for you to go and play.
Totally. I think game streaming is the thing that, of all the changes we've seen in the industry, cloud or not, maybe has been the one I think that's the most interesting. Particularly because it just changes where you play the game. For example, I have a console, and when I play on my console, I see it as a little bit like appointment gaming. In my head, 5 o'clock, I'm going to sit down, play on my Xbox. And when you have the ability to stream that game anywhere on my phone, on my PC, I don't have to, in my head, make time to do that on my console. Also, the level of accessibility, as a game creator, I don't have to think about creating different versions of my game for Xbox One, for Xbox One S, for Xbox One X, for Xbox Series, etc., etc. It's, well, everyone is streaming from the same silicon in the data center. And because typically the providers have economies of scale, they're buying goodness knows how many different racks of processors, you normally get a very good deal, which brings the lower cost down. And so there's a ton of value. I mean, equally, going back to the game portfolio, game membership, if as a game creator, you have to be concerned about, if I'm building a game for, the top console, how much is that console? How big is that addressable audience? How many people can go out and pay for that for a console versus, hey, I'm building a game and the person who wants to play that just has to pay, I don't know, $15 a month or $20 a month. Gosh, my audience or accessibility is much greater then, because these people don't have to invest in hardware, whatever the cost, to be able to participate in my game.
Yeah, no, completely. And I deliberately, as you were talking there, you will have seen, but for anyone who's maybe listening in rather than watching, I deliberately got my bag out on screen for anyone who's watching the video right now. So you could see me get out this, which is my Xbox controller, which is always in my bag. I've got this little connector on it as well, where I can put my phone on it. And I've got my phone with me. So if I am traveling, if I am at the office, if I am somewhere, not at home for whatever reason, I don't have my console, that's fine. I can just carry on literally picking up where I left off, because of the whole streaming idea. I don't have the games on my phone. They're not played on my phone. I can be out and about and continue where I left off. But that's another really important point, right? Is I can continue where I left off. Let's just appreciate that for a moment. Thinking of the days where we had memory cards and all these things, that data where you've played on your PC or your device or wherever you played gets synced back to the cloud. So when you stream that new game that you've been playing, you just carry on where you left off, because not only are you playing an instance of that game somewhere else in the world, probably in a data center somewhere, but you're also have that state pulled in, so you can just carry on where you left off. And you as a gamer are satisfied because you're not having to start again. You're not losing all of your achievements or doing a separate instance of the game. You are continuing with that same experience that you've been working along.
And I think that's a really important distinction to call out, because I think the perception has been previously that when you play, game streaming, or you play on your phone, it's a different version of the game for mobile. When we're talking about game streaming, we're not talking about a mobile version, a console version, a PC version. We're talking about just a version, one singular version of the game. And so, to your point, if you play on the bus and then you come home and you play on your console, you leave off where you are, because it is the same gameplay. It's not a mobile version versus a PC version. Like, again, you have a controller, so you don't have to, as a developer, think about, do I put touch controls in to play this, and how do I modify the game, and how do I make sure things aren't on the screen so you can tap them on your mobile phone screen? All that goes away. You're streaming the same. You're just streaming the game to a different device with an appropriate input.
Yep. No, exactly. And there's also an interesting piece as a game developer, game creator as well. I will be transparent and upfront. I may have bought another console over recent weeks for certain exclusives. So I did buy a PS5 for Spider-Man in particular. But when you think about,
I'll forgive you.
Exactly. But I've got my Xbox, and I'm always an Xbox fan at heart.
No, I'm joking.
But there's an important point though, right? As a game creator, and for anyone listening in who's a developer, has built applications like for Windows and Mac or Linux or anything like that, whilst yes, technology is getting better to make those applications across different platforms, there are still bumps along the road that you're going to run into. And even when you look in the Windows ecosystem, for example, you don't just have a PC, you have a PC with this amount of RAM, this CPU, this level of operating system, and so many different factors which influence how that game, not how that game, sorry, how that application is going to run. And same scenario here with gaming, right? The reason I mentioned the PS5 is just to give obviously example of different consoles. Then you've got PC, then you've got mobile. it's
Yeah.
it's it's not going to be realistic to try and build one game across all of those platforms where you're going to get a super consistent experience unless you figure out a way where you are literally targeting one platform that can be delivered to all of those platforms, if it makes sense. And I think that's what streaming ultimately offers, isn't it? Is that consistent platform that then you could potentially access through any of those devices at that point.
Yeah, you say something that stood out, right? Which is I didn't realize until a couple of years back that when Xbox 360 back compatibility was made, the games didn't work, not because of I don't know the general compatibility, but it was a different
Mm-hmm.
silicone in the new Xbox
Yep.
console, and I was like, wait, that makes a difference on the gameplay, and they were like, yes, the game just doesn't play
Mm-hmm.
the same. So that just highlights that you can't just build a game as a game creator and ship it for PlayStation, for Nintendo, if appropriate, for Steam, PC, Xbox. It
Yeah.
doesn't work. Different devices, different structure. So as a game creator, you have to think, right, how many people do I have to hire? Well, the resources, what's the investment I have to make to diversify or fragment my game to be applicable in different platforms? What's the addressable audience? To your point, in the future, if you're building on a common infrastructure, that is maybe platform agnostic, but is the power is there. That massively streamlines your efforts as a game creator, reducing your costs. So maybe you reallocate your cost into certain talent or gameplay or innovative features. Again, that benefits the consumer because you are streamlining the job for the game developer. They haven't got to worry about, oh gosh, different versions. I have to modify it to work on this. I have to test it and all this, which also increases the
Yep.
cycle. So as a consumer, you're getting much more
Yep.
content. Um, so I think from that perspective, as a game creator, it's really exciting what possibilities are coming in the next few years for this.
It it's just such a fascinating topic, isn't it? Like the thing I'm just hung up on and my brain has kept thinking about since you mentioned it is the point around if you do want to go those multiple platforms, which obviously could be an option, that's absolutely fine. You've got to bring more developers in, you've got to increase the team, you've got to then increase the, I don't know, the licenses of whatever editor you're using and the tools that you're using. And
Yeah.
I think we did a session before on all the back end tools you might be using to test your game, build your game, collaborate. So as you start growing those development teams, that cost increases. And when you start thinking about the opportunity cost of you building the games on other platforms versus not building it, there's then that almost tug of war, I guess, of should you even build for those other platforms,
Yeah.
and is the addressable market or the gamers that you're going after on that platform, is it worth it to bring that as a native game, I guess, so we could maybe call it that way, as opposed to doing something like we're
Yes.
talking about here as a streamed game where it's then accessible on that platform through an app or through a site or different platforms implemented different ways, but that kind of methodology, it's a really, really fascinating change of a business, isn't it, really? I think fundamentally.
Yeah. And a fact that stuck with me, again, referencing the 360 from a while
Mm.
back, that kind of underpins the comments we were just making about the Xbox back compatibility and building for different versions. I remember, I think there was the addition of Forza Horizon, which was launching on Xbox One and Xbox 360 at the time. It was just when the Xbox One launched. It was still,
Mm.
catering for the 360 audience. And I remember that one of the developers was telling me that the clouds in the Xbox One version would have consumed the entire processing power of the Xbox 360. So just to animate the clouds in the Xbox One edition, that would have 100% absorbed all the graphical capabilities of the Xbox 360.
Wow.
So it's not just getting the game to run on different silicone; it's also just building different versions of the game, so different levels of graphic fidelity for the capability of each console, so that you can play it. And it's not a poor gameplay experience. But and a segue into kind of maybe one of the cons of cloud streaming, which we still have to be cognizant of, is you're ultimately you're ultimately inputting into a device. Like the controller you just had there would be Bluetooth connected to your phone, which then has to send a signal to a intermediary point, which then connects you to the data center. That input has to be received, processed, and then the video output has to be sent back in enough speed that it relates to the input you put back on that device when you first made that movement. No one wants to play a game where, for example, I'm moving my character and then like 1 second later it happens. That's not fun. There's that lag. And it's probably the lag is the biggest enemy of any game player. The fact that you can buy keyboards that cost almost $500 to reduce the lag from your keyboard.
Yep.
I mean, that's how important it is to some players. So that's something to consider. I think, we obviously work for Microsoft. I have a better idea of this, but Microsoft has the largest footprint of data centers globally. And the reason that's important is you want an infrastructure where the processing takes place close to my proximity, because the data has less distance to travel. We still transmit data through cables under the ocean. And so when you think about that experience, you want to build your game on an infrastructure where it's as close as possible to your players. That reduces the latency and improves the gameplay. You're still traveling around the world, and that signal still has time. No matter how fantastic your technology, it's still going to have a bit of a lag in there. So I think that's still something to be cognizant of. But I do think, with the greater footprint of data centers, with advancements in terms of packet exchange, the data being sent back and forth in smaller quantities of code, so it can be conveyed in a quicker pace is exciting. I think that's going to be the next advancement into how that translates. And by the way, that's not a new concept. A lot of these video service providers have content distribution networks super close to where their consumers are, where their density is, because for the same reason, you don't want to be watching a video that's taking ages to buffer, because all that video is coming from the opposite side of the world to your device or TV, wherever it's processing.
That's exactly how my website works. And if anyone is listening to the audio right now through your favorite provider, I've got Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. That content isn't hosted through there. They actually point to my own deployment, which is behind a CDN. So again, I know I've got users in the US, in Australia, in Europe, and the same point. I don't want them to have to come all the way to the UK, because that's where I happen to deploy, because I'm here, to go and get that content. So same kind of analogy, right, with the game side of things. You want to try and go to a close point of presence, so you're optimizing for that round trip time. And ultimately, we haven't solved the physics problem of the speed of light yet. We're still bound by that one, unfortunately. But it's a really interesting point. Sorry, go on, Lee. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to make one brief comment. I don't want to get myself into trouble with the Welsh government, but you and I are both Welsh people. And maybe remember the days, not just of your proximity to the data center, but the infrastructure that is between you and that local distribution center. Yes. Because I remember the days when Xbox 360 updates on my parents' 3 megabit internet connection in not a very distant part of Wales took most of the morning, which kind of, killed the fun and excitement of sitting down and playing a game. What's also changing is how mainly governments are investing. We just had a huge bill signed off in the US on infrastructure. In the UK, my parents now have 60 megabit internet. They have fiber optic cable, interestingly thread through the sewer system, so that there's greater connectivity between them and the data centers. So that in itself is also making advancements. 5G mobile technology is also making advancements. And when I'm on my mobile phone, as you showed that little connection you have, I'm not streaming over a 3G or even in some cases a 4G. So it's also worth noting that in some cases, innovation isn't always held back by the innovative product itself. It's ensuring that the complementary or complementary services or infrastructure also catch up to be able to meet the same level of experience. It's never something that's normally done in isolation.
Yeah, Yeah, and the point I was actually going to make was the other scenario, and I know this is pushing it to the extreme and the complete edge here, but if you're on a plane, you're probably not going to be able to game stream. You're not going to be able to pick up that internet connection, which, fine. You're not going to haul your Xbox or your PC onto a plane, right? So maybe that analogy doesn't quite fly. Oh, wow. Too many puns there. Um,
Well, you'd be surprised. I actually used, gosh, it's a while back. I haven't flown a lot recently, but on a domestic US flight, one of the mainstream providers has now super fast internet on
huh.
board, so much that you can stream Netflix. And I actually was on the insider program for Microsoft's version of cloud streaming, and I actually was able to have a remarkably good experience. There were parts where it dropped out, I will admit, but I would say for most of the flight, I was able to stream content at super fast speeds, which was, again, the infrastructure is changing. Aeroplanes now have super fast internet because customers are expecting to be able to stream their content versus subscribe to the content that's on board.
Awesome. Okay, I stand corrected then. You don't need to take your Xboxes on planes or PCs or anything, folks. There may be options. But again, like you say, it really depends on that periphery and that almost halo of the different services, not talking the Halo game, but the periphery of services which go ahead and empower that experience. Too many puns in this show today. My brain is firing with too many different puns here. Um, but it's really interesting, right? Like we started off saying, right, we're going to talk about, I guess, game streaming broadly, but there's so many areas again that we've touched upon from previous sessions, like the development cost of games, the business model of games, the networking, for example. We talked about it from live streaming rather than game streaming, and now we're talking about that here. There's so many factors which keep reoccurring across these episodes, which is just really fascinating to see them all come back here.
Yeah. There's one which I'll close with, which
Mm.
is the comment we made last time, or maybe the two videos back, which was games as a platform or games as a
Mm.
service. All these advancements in the cloud, particularly around game streaming and game subscription services, really push the case forward for games as a service. Because as a game consumer and equally for a game creator, the more touch points that my consumers can access my game, the more likely they are to play my game, the more my game moves from just being, 8-hour game for $60, $70 in GameStop or any other retailer to being, well, let's take GTA as an example. Like, this is a complete service. You can just engage with it. There's constant DLC, there's in-game currency. It becomes its own service. Again, Minecraft is another example of that. And as a game creator, it changes. The cloud is changing what my game is. The gameplay isn't too dissimilar, but the way the game is delivered and how it exists is completely different. And that's a bit I think is incredibly fascinating. And if I was a game creator, it provides so much opportunity for me. I mean, just cast your mind back 5 years. I was building a game for this price with maybe some extra add-ons added in and some multiplayer. Now I'm building my own platform, and gamers can subscribe. They can buy DLC. They can play it on mobile, PC, phone. I build it once. I save so much development costs. I have constant reiteration. As a business, that is phenomenal in terms of how it changes how you approach building a game.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? Because do you really need another GTA? Do you really need another Minecraft? Do you really need another Sea of Thieves? Unless you're fundamentally changing like that base engine and that base gameplay, fundamentally how that game is working, it's probably a case of just adding more content, iterating, improving, until a point where maybe the technology's advanced so far along that you go, you know what? Maybe we do need to look at completely building the game engine from the ground up again and starting again. And it allows you to do
Yeah.
different things, doesn't it, with the game? It's just really fascinating. And bringing it back to the subscription side, you could even then have your own in-game subscription to keep up to date with those content updates or obviously that can backfire. We've seen across different games and different industries and looking at how that model works and pay to play and these types of things. But I think ultimately if the value is there and
Yeah.
that value is being seen by gamers, then we'll keep investing in that. So really, really fascinating topic. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, we could probably go a lot longer on this, Brian.
I think so, yeah. I'm watching the
Maybe
clock here as well.
Yeah.
Cool. I guess any closing thoughts before we wrap up here, Lee?
No, other than, gosh, I mean, what are we going to be talking about this time next year? Literally, it does feel like that at the moment.
It does. It does. I agree. I mean, we've been doing this probably for about 6 months now, I guess. And already, like, looking between now and then, some of the things that you can see clearly shaping in the industry is, yeah, really
Yeah.
interesting. So awesome. Lee, thank you so much again for joining. Another great
Yeah.
session.
Thanks for having me.
And yeah, we'll figure out what we'll talk about next time.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thanks, Lee. So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about game streaming, not live streaming. I'm going to re-emphasize that point. Streaming games to a device that you happen to be using. Maybe it's your PC, maybe it's your TV, maybe it's your mobile phone, whatever it is, that game is playing elsewhere. And we've talked about the benefits of whether you're a game creator or an individual, an actual user, and what that means for you, the different use cases that can be opened up, and you know, this kind of new delivery model, the subscriptions approach, is so much information in there. So I definitely encourage you, if you were listening into that at all and anything jumped out, let us know. Hit us up over on Twitter. Our usernames are both on screen there, at Reddibo and at Lee Williams. Let us know. So otherwise, folks, you know the deal. If you've liked the content, please hit the like button, please hit subscribe, and please hit the notification bell so you know as soon as there's some brand new content. And otherwise, as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next one, bye for now.